2 weeks after my son's wedding, the venue coordinator called me and whispered, "Sir, I found something on the security footage. From that night, come alone tomorrow morning. And please don't say a word to your son yet."
I was standing at my kitchen counter, washing a coffee cup that did not need washing. The blue ceramic bowl beside the sink held every spare key to my house. My late wife had bought it at a church sale, and for 36 years the sound of a key dropped into that bowl meant someone had come home safe. That morning only one key lay inside it. The second had been missing since the wedding. "What did you find?" I asked. The coordinator took a breath. "I cannot tell you over the phone." The photographer asked me to look at the timestamps. "Your daughters and the men they live with left the reception together. They went into the service corridor during your son's first dance. What happens after that may involve your house." My son, Evan, was still on his honeymoon. For 2 weeks, I had been looking at the photograph on my refrigerator of him in his navy suit, laughing while his new wife tried to straighten his tie. I had wanted his marriage to begin with that laugh, not with me dragging him home to hear that his sisters might be using his wedding as cover for something ugly. "I'll be there," I said. When I hung up, I did not call Mara or Tessa. I did not call Evan. I opened the old steel box in my bedroom closet, checked the original deed and the home insurance papers, and took the blue bowl with me to the kitchen table. There was a small square of dust where the missing key had been. My house was paid for. It was not grand. It was a brick ranch with a wide porch, a tired maple in the yard, and a workshop my wife had once complained was larger than our dining room. But it was mine. More importantly, it was still home to Mara and her husband after their restaurant failed, and to Tessa and her boyfriend after Tessa said she needed time to finish school. I had said yes because they were my daughters. I had never said yes to giving them my house. Before I left for the venue, I called the county title office and the credit bureau. I told them I feared someone might be using my name or property without permission. I asked for the temporary fraud protections available to a homeowner, nothing more. The clerk told me a request could be flagged and reviewed, but she could not tell me whether anyone had made one. Then I called a licensed investigator whose number an old contractor friend had given me after a permit dispute years before. "I may be wrong," I told her. "I hope I am wrong. But if I am not, I need lawful proof before I let this touch my son's marriage." She said she could preserve business records, speak to willing witnesses, and lawfully document an authorized professional meeting. She could not enter my home, place anything in a private room, invent an excuse to make my daughters talk, or promise that suspicion would become a case. "That is exactly what I need," I said. "No tricks, no private life. Only the truth about my house and my name." The venue looked different in daylight. The flowers were gone, the chairs were stacked. What had been a room full of music and champagne smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. The coordinator met me by the service hallway with a photographer I remembered from the wedding. He was a quiet man with a camera harness and tired eyes. He had stayed late that night because the bride's family had requested extra pictures under the lights outside. The coordinator showed me the security footage first. It was ordinary, wide-angle video from a marked venue camera over the service entrance. No secret camera, no sound. At 8:43, Mara came through the door holding a red portfolio under her arm. Tessa followed with her boyfriend. Mara's husband came last, checking the corridor behind him. For 7 minutes, all four stayed beyond the frame. At 8:50, they came back laughing. Mara no longer carried the portfolio. Tessa's boyfriend had a white envelope tucked inside his jacket. The coordinator paused the screen. "I only noticed because the photographer asked for the hallway time," she said. "He has a photograph that should not exist." The photographer opened a laptop. His raw picture showed the edge of the service corridor from the far side of the ballroom. It had not been posed. A waiter had stepped in front of his lens while he was photographing the first dance. In the corner of that accidental frame were my daughters, their partners, and the red portfolio open on a linen cart. I knew the portfolio before I saw what was inside it. The leather was scuffed at one corner, where my wife had spilled white paint while we were repainting the den. I had kept tax records in it for years. It had been on the top shelf of my study closet. The photograph did not show every page. It did not have to. On top was the first sheet from the folder I had checked that morning. The sheet with my name printed beneath the words "Durable Power of Attorney." My mouth went dry. "That form was in my house," I said. The photographer nodded once. "There is more, Mr. Bennett." I did not know what I had until yesterday. I was making a voice note about the lighting before I went back into the ballroom. My phone was in the vendor work area, where the venue had assigned me to edit. The service door beside it was partly open. I did not follow anyone. I did not put anything in their room, but their voices carried through the open doorway into the place I was already working. He looked at the coordinator before continuing. "I recorded the note as part of my job. When I listened again, I heard your daughter say your name." I stopped editing and called the coordinator. The coordinator had already checked with the venue's manager. The photographer had been working in an authorized vendor space, and the family had been speaking in a service corridor that opened into it. No private suite, hotel room, bathroom, or home had been recorded. The photographer had not posted the audio or played it for anyone except the coordinator. "You should talk to an attorney before you use it," he told me. "But I thought you should know before somebody uses those papers against you." I asked to hear only enough to understand the danger. The photographer pressed play. At first, there was music from the ballroom, muffled by a wall. Then I heard Mara's voice. "Dad will be distracted by Evan all weekend. The papers just need to look like they were already in motion." Tessa said, "What if he checks the closet?" Mara's husband answered, "He will not. He thinks the wedding is proof we are all still family." Then a door shut and the rest became too faint to make out. I sat very still. I had spent my career as a building inspector. I knew what a crack in a foundation looked like before the homeowner wanted to admit it. I also knew the difference between a crack and a collapsed wall. That recording was a crack. It was not yet proof that my daughters had forged anything. It was not proof that Evan knew. It was not proof that I had lost my house. But it was enough to make me stop treating a missing key like forgetfulness. I asked the photographer to preserve the original photo files, the ordinary work audio, and the dates that belonged to them. I asked him not to contact my daughters or post one image. The investigator arranged for the files to be copied and preserved without altering them. My attorney reviewed the situation and said the wedding material was a warning, not a final answer. "Do not confront them from one photograph and a fragment of audio," she said. "Protect your title. Preserve your papers. Then let their next choice tell you what they intended." The title clerk called while I was still in my attorney's office. She could not tell me every word in the flagged file, but she could tell me enough. Someone had opened an inquiry against the house using a durable power of attorney in my name. The document claimed I had authorized Mara to discuss a credit line and a future transfer. No money had moved. No sale had gone through. The alert I placed that morning had stopped the file before it reached a closing table. That should have relieved me. Instead, it made the danger solid. I had helped both daughters more times than I could count. When Mara's restaurant closed, I cleared the spare bedroom and told her husband they could stay until they found steady work. When Tessa said her rent had risen and she wanted to finish a teaching certificate, I gave her the den and told her boyfriend he could use the workshop as long as he kept the sawdust outside. At first, the house had felt alive again. Mara cooked too much pasta. Tessa played old songs while she studied. Their men repaired gutters, changed tires, and called me dad when they wanted something heavy lifted. But in the last year, I had noticed the questions changing. They stopped asking whether I needed help and started asking where I kept documents. Mara wanted to know what the house might be worth. Tessa asked whether I had a will. Her boyfriend once said, half joking, that a man my age did not need 3 bedrooms and a workshop. I had answered each question alone. I told myself grown children sometimes worry badly. I told myself they were thinking ahead because life had been hard on them. Now I understood that a family can use concern as a crowbar if you let every small question go unanswered. My attorney asked whether I wanted to seek an immediate emergency order. I looked at the unfinished evidence in front of us and said no. I wanted protection, not a public accusation built on a scrap of conversation. The title flag, the locked study, and the preserved files kept the house safe for the moment. What I needed next was the choice my daughters made when they learned I was not easy to frighten. That afternoon, I changed the lock on my study and moved the original documents to the attorney's office. I did not change the outside door locks. Mara and Tessa lived in my home. No father should use a new lock to turn a suspicion into a punishment, and no homeowner has the right to throw people onto a sidewalk because he is angry. Instead, I told both daughters I wanted them to meet me the next morning at the title company. I said I had found papers in my study that involved the house, and I wanted every conversation about property to happen in a professional room. Mara called me before I could hang up. "Dad, are you upset about the portfolio?" she asked. I let the silence sit between us. Why would I be upset about a portfolio? Her breath caught. Just once. Tessa said you might have been looking for old tax papers. We were only trying to help organize things. Then a title company meeting will be easy. I said. She became warm and practical, the way she had sounded when she was 8 and wanted another cookie. "Please do not drag Evan into this. He just got married. He has enough going on." "I agree," I said. "Do not drag Evan into it." The next morning, Mara and Tessa arrived with both men. They carried a folder, a home value printout, and smiles that did not reach their eyes. The investigator was already there in the title company's conference area, introduced only as someone helping preserve the file. The company had agreed to the meeting because a possible use of my property and identity had been flagged. It was an authorized professional setting. The investigator told everyone plainly that no one would be recorded in my house or in private spaces, and that any business discussion in the meeting room would be preserved according to the company's stated rules. No one objected. Mara slid a paper toward me. "We should talk about your future," she said. "You are almost 70, this house is expensive, and you do not need all this space. We found a smaller place where you could be comfortable." "Where?" I asked. "A senior apartment near the clinic." "And where would you live?" Her husband answered before she could. "The house could stay in the family. We could handle the payments and repairs." The paper was a valuation. $680,000 sat in the center of the page like a price tag on my life. Tessa leaned forward. "No one is trying to hurt you, Dad. We are trying to make sure the house does not get wasted." "Wasted on what?" I asked. She looked toward the title officer, then down at the table. "On you being alone in it." That sentence hurt more than I expected. My wife had been gone 6 years. I knew how quiet the rooms could be. But I also knew that loneliness was not legal permission for my daughters to decide where I belonged. I opened the folder they had brought. Inside was a copy of the durable power of attorney from the wedding photograph. My name was printed on it. The signature at the bottom tried to look like mine. It did not. I had signed inspection reports for 40 years. My capital H always leaned forward because I had broken my wrist as a teenager. The signature on the page stood upright and neat. "Who signed this?" I asked. Mara's face did not change. "You did, Dad. A few months ago. You said you wanted us to have a plan. Where? At home. Who was there?" She hesitated. Tessa jumped in. "You do not remember every conversation you have." The investigator placed no accusation on the table. The title officer merely said the file would be held while she reviewed the authority document. She asked the 4 of them to wait in the adjoining client room while she made a business copy of the papers. I went with my attorney to a desk near the front, where we could see the hall but could not hear their voices. The investigator later explained exactly what had been preserved. The adjoining room was part of the same authorized title company business meeting with the ordinary audio notice the group had accepted at check-in. No one had followed them home, entered a private room, or planted a device. They simply believed I was too far away to hear them. She told me the recording contained specific acknowledgments that the authority form was false. The home equity file was worth $680,000, and the sale notice was meant to frighten me. She asked whether I wanted to hear it alone at the front desk. I said no. The recording established a serious crime, but I would not let the most damaging words be filtered through my anger before Evan could hear them for himself. I asked her to preserve the original, and I asked the title officer to complete the immediate hold first. By then, the four of them were already coming back through the doorway with their faces arranged into concern. Mara stood so quickly, her chair struck the wall. "This is humiliating," she said. "You bring strangers in to tell your daughters you do not trust them." I looked at the paper again. I brought people who know the difference between trust and a forged name. The four of them left together. On the way out, Tessa's boyfriend turned back. "You are going to regret making your children feel like criminals," he said. I did not answer. I had no wish to feel powerful. I wanted my wife's blue bowl to hold keys, not evidence. By that evening, a fake notice was taped to my front door. It said the house had been listed for sale, and that I needed to make arrangements to leave within 30 days. It looked official until I read the name of the company at the bottom. The attorney called them while I sat beside her desk. They had never listed my house. They had never sent a notice. Someone had copied their name and their logo badly enough to scare an older man, but not well enough to survive a telephone call. My daughters had crossed from trying to take my authority to trying to frighten me out of my own home. That evening, I came through the back door while all four of them sat around my kitchen table. The blue key bowl was between them, empty except for the one key I had left inside. Mara had made chicken soup, as if a pot on the stove could turn a false notice into concern. "You should not have called a title company," she said. "You are making people think we are after you." I set the false notice on the table. "Did any of you put this on my door?" No one said yes. No one said no. Tessa's boyfriend looked at the paper and then at Mara. Her husband stared down at his phone. Tessa began explaining that maybe someone had made a mistake online, but her voice had the thin, hurried sound of a person trying to cover a hole with her hands. "I am not discussing property in this kitchen," I said. "Tomorrow the title officer will have everything she needs." Mara stood, angry now. "You are going to make Evan choose between us and you." "No," I said. "You are the ones who used his wedding to make a decision about me. Do not hand him a choice you created and call it mine." I went to my room and closed the door. For the first time in my own house, I put a chair under the knob. It would not have stopped anyone determined to get in. It was only a reminder to myself that I had waited too long to take the danger seriously. That was when I called Evan. He answered from a beach rental 3 states away. I could hear waves and his wife laughing somewhere behind him. "Dad, what is wrong?" he asked. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted him to get in his car and come home angry for me. But I had promised myself I would not use a son's love as a weapon before I knew the whole truth. "Your sisters may be involved in a serious problem with the house," I said. "I have stopped anything from moving. I am handling it with a lawyer and a title officer. I am not asking you to choose sides today." The silence on the line changed. "Did they do something?" "I do not know enough to say yet. I will tell you when I have facts you can hear without having to guess." He was quiet for a long moment. "They asked me at the wedding if you had started forgetting things," he said. "Mara said you had been repeating yourself." I thought she was worried. The sound of the ocean kept moving behind him. "I am sorry," he said. "You do not have to be sorry for believing your sisters," I told him. "Just do not sign anything for anyone. Do not repeat a story about me unless you know it is true." After we ended the call, the investigator told me the four had contacted the title company again. They wanted a new appointment. They said I had become confused and that they needed to explain the family plan without outside influence. My attorney said it created a chance, not a guarantee. They may come in and say nothing, she warned. Then that will tell us something too, I said. I agreed to a second meeting the next afternoon. I told Mara I would consider an arrangement if she brought every paper she believed I had signed. It was a hard thing to say, because it made her think I might bend. But it also moved the discussion out of my kitchen and into a place where there were rules. Before the meeting, the investigator explained the boundary again. She could preserve the business discussion in the authorized title company room. She could not record my house, follow anyone into a private place, or feed words to anybody. The photographer's files would remain separate. The daughters would have to make their own choices. I do not want them trapped, I said. You are not trapping them, she replied. You are refusing to let a property transaction happen in the dark. That was the line I needed to hold. Mara and Tessa came with their partners early. I came in 5 minutes later with the title officer and my attorney, then deliberately stepped into the office next door to review one page. The investigator stayed with the file under the company's authority. I did not know whether the four would speak. I only knew that the wedding had taught them to mistake a closed door for safety. For nearly a minute, the room was silent. Then Tessa's boyfriend said, "He is not going to sign. We should take the sale notice down before he calls someone." Mara answered, "It is already too late for that. The power of attorney is in the file. If we back away now, Dad will keep the house and Evan will think we tried to steal from him too." Tessa said, "We did not steal anything yet." Her sister's voice became sharp. "Do not say that out loud." There was a chair scraping across the floor. Mara's husband said, "Then tell us what you want us to do. We have the home equity packet ready. We can still use the power of attorney before they freeze it." Mara spoke so quietly, I almost missed her through the wall. "Keep Dad out of the room until the title officer leaves." The four of us copied his signature onto that durable power of attorney, and we used it to open a $680,000 home equity file. The fake sale notice was supposed to scare him into leaving before he called the police. Evan's wedding was cover because he would not believe his two sisters and their men were doing this while he was dancing. "If any of you panic now, we lose the house and we go to jail." No one answered her. Then Tessa whispered, "I did not think it would go this far." Mara said, "You thought it would end with Dad paying for your life. That is the same thing." I stood in the adjoining office with my hand on the blue key bowl I had brought from home. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt a grief so clean it almost made me dizzy. The investigator gave a small nod. The audio had been preserved. The title officer had heard enough through her monitoring station to know the meeting could not continue as an ordinary property discussion. I walked back into the room. Mara looked at my face and knew something had changed. "Dad," she began. "Evan is coming home tonight," I said. "Tomorrow you will all hear what was said with him in the room. I will not let you make him choose based on my anger or your version." Tessa's boyfriend stood. "You cannot keep us here." "I am not keeping you," I said. "You may leave. The title officer has already frozen the property file. The rest is your choice." Mara reached for the folder. The investigator placed her hand on it first. "These are now preserved business records," she said. "You may speak with counsel. You may not remove the file." Mara looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You planned this," she said. "No," I told her. "I planned to learn whether my daughters were telling the truth. You planned the rest." Evan came home the next morning with his wife. She waited in the lobby because this was not her family wound to carry. But she squeezed his hand before he walked into the conference room. The room held all four of them: Evan, the title fraud officer, the photographer, the investigator, my attorney, and me. The title officer explained that there were serious inconsistencies in a property file, and that no decision would be made based on family arguments. Mara tried first. "Dad is confused and upset," she said. "We were trying to help him plan for the future." Evan looked at me, then at his sisters. "Why did you tell me Dad was forgetting things?" he asked. Tessa folded her arms. "Because he has been difficult. You know he has." "Difficult is not the same as confused," Evan said. I pressed play. The first recording was the photographer's work audio from the wedding. Music drifted beneath it. Then Mara's voice said that I would be distracted by Evan, and the papers needed to look like they were already in motion. Evan's face tightened. The photographer opened the original images beside the sound file. He did not talk about software or technical terms. He showed the raw wedding sequence, preserved in the order it had been taken. The first dance, the waiter crossing the frame, the red portfolio open on a linen cart. The four of them gathered around the authority form, then the four of them walking back toward the celebration. The title fraud officer pointed at the capture times. Then at the venue footage confirming when they left the ballroom. It did not prove every word they had spoken. It proved that the wedding had not been an innocent misunderstanding or an alibi made from thin air. Mara looked at the floor. Then I played the second recording. This time, no music softened it. The room heard Mara say that the four of them copied my signature onto the durable power of attorney. They heard her name the $680,000 home equity file. They heard her admit the sale notice was meant to make me leave before I called police. And that they used Evan's wedding as cover because they thought he would never believe it. Evan's chair slid backward. He put both hands over his mouth for a moment, and when he lowered them, he looked older than he had the day before. Tessa began to cry. "Mara made it sound like we were only protecting Dad," she said. "She said he would thank us once he had a smaller place." Mara turned toward her. "You signed the papers, too." "I signed what you put in front of me," Tessa said. "That is not a defense," Evan said quietly. "Not after what we just heard." The title fraud officer did not raise her voice. She placed the power of attorney, the false sale notice, and the audio preservation receipt on the table. "Mr. Bennett has denied this authority. The documents contain material false representations. The recorded statement shows knowledge and intent. Our office has frozen the property file and referred the evidence to financial crimes investigators." Mara looked at me again. "You are sending your own daughters to jail over a house." I felt Evan flinch beside me. "No," I said. "I am sending a forged power of attorney, a false eviction notice, and an attempt to take my home to people whose job is to decide what they mean." Tessa's boyfriend started talking fast. He said Mara had pushed them. Mara's husband said he thought it was a family restructuring plan. Each of them tried to hand their own piece of the blame to somebody else. The detective arrived later that afternoon, after reviewing the preserved files and taking initial statements. He asked every person whether they wanted counsel. He asked me to confirm that I had not signed the power of attorney, authorized a loan, or consented to a sale notice. I answered each question once. "No, no," the detective told Mara, Tessa, and their partners that they were being arrested on probable cause related to forged authority and attempted property fraud. There were no shouting officers, no guns, no grand speech. Just handcuffs, rights read in ordinary voices, and four people walking past the blue key bowl I had carried into the conference room because I could not bear to leave it behind. Evan did not look away when his sisters left. He was crying, but he did not look away. In the weeks after the arrests, the house became quieter than it had been in years. Mara and Tessa were released pending their cases and returned only to collect personal belongings under the temporary terms set by the court. They could not use my documents, enter my study, or contact the title company about my home. They were still living under my roof on temporary permission, and I could not simply put their boxes on the curb. My attorney filed the proper civil request for possession. The court heard both sides. The judge did not punish them for being my daughters or for having nowhere else they preferred to live. The order was about the fraudulent documents, the false notice, the damaged trust, and the fact that I needed a safe home while the criminal case moved forward. 6 weeks later, the judge granted a possession order. The daughters and their partners were given a date to leave and a legal path to collect their things. They chose not to leave. On the morning the order was executed, the sheriff came with 2 city police officers to keep the peace. That was all. The sheriff showed the order, gave them time to take the bags they had been told they could take, and stood by while a locksmith changed the outer locks. No one was dragged through the yard. No one was left without the personal property the court allowed them to have. But when Mara put her hand on the blue key bowl by the door, the sheriff stopped her. "That stays with the property," he said. Mara looked at me. For 1 second, she was the little girl who used to drop a dandelion into that bowl after school. Then she turned away. After the deputies left, Evan sat with me on the porch. He had not forgiven his sisters. He had not decided whether he ever would. His wife had gone back to work, and he was trying to learn what it meant to be newly married when the family you came from had just broken apart. "I keep thinking I should have known," he said. "You should have been able to trust the people who raised you beside that kitchen counter," I said. "That is different." He looked through the front window at the empty bowl. "What are you going to do with the house?" I had thought about that question every day since the judge's order. I did not want to make a will that turned the house into another promise people could bend around. I did not want Evan to feel rewarded for being innocent or punished because his sisters were not. With advice from my attorney and an independent trustee, I placed the home into an irrevocable trust that protected my right to live there for the rest of my life and prevented any family member from borrowing against it, selling it, or speaking for me. It was not revenge. It was a lock on a door that had been left open too long. Evan received a letter explaining the trust. It did not offer him the house. It offered him honesty. If he wanted a role someday, he would have to earn the independent trustee's confidence, not mine in a moment of grief. He read it at my kitchen table and nodded. "That is fair," he said. "I do not want a future somebody can use against you." Months later, the prosecutor's office told me the criminal cases had moved forward on the forged documents and attempted property fraud. I did not ask for a harsher sentence than the facts could bear. I gave my statement, answered every call, and let the court do what a court was meant to do. One rainy Saturday, Evan came by to repair the porch rail. He had brought a new key, cut by the locksmith after the trust was in place. He did not drop it into the bowl. He held it out to me first. "Where do you want this?" he asked. I set the blue bowl back on the counter. For a long time, it had held evidence of who thought they could come and go as they pleased. Then I placed Evan's key inside it. "Here," I said, "and when you leave, bring it back." He smiled, not because everything was healed, but because the rule was plain. The sound of that key touching the blue ceramic bowl was the sound of somebody coming home safely again.